Welcome to Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks, where we explore what neurodiversity looks like in real classrooms, especially in urban educational spaces, and challenge deficit-based thinking with affirming and evidence-based practices. Today, I am honored to welcome Dr. Noor Syed, Associate Professor of Applied Behavior Analysis and Founding Director of the Center for Autism Advocacy Research, Education and Support at SUNY Empire State University. Dr. Syed is also President of the New York State Association for Behavior Analysis and a national and international leader in autism advocacy, ethics, and inclusive education. A neurodivergent professional herself, Dr. Syed's work is deeply personal and grounded in culturally responsive, affirming ABA that supports neurodiverse learners and the systems that serve them. Dr. Syed, welcome. We are so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for thinking of me and for asking me to join you and for all the amazing work that you do as well. It's such a pleasure.
So, personal connection. I always start with this question. You have shared that your journey into this work is personal. How has your lived experience with neurodiversity shaped your approach to ABA and education?
Thanks, Dr. Stanley. I appreciate your question, and it does have really personal roots for me. I'd love to share a little bit of background on how I got to this space, because I think that informs some of the work we engage in now, that we have the honor to engage in now. But as you mentioned, I myself am diagnosed with ADHD along with a few other neurodiverse identities. And I'm a late diagnosis for some of these identities. And that was really powerful for me, because it finally gave an identity that I could really think about and think about as a strength in ways that I move forward in the ways that I interact with the world. And it was honestly empowering to hear that identity and really helpful. It was also super impactful, I think, to hear, or for me to have had the experience that it was so difficult to obtain a diagnosis as an adult, having to find someone who can do that with me, all those waiting lists. It really brings to mind, I think, some of the challenges we experience in terms of the ability to diagnose and what that means. That is one part of my journey. I think the other part that is I think about quite a bit, and I know we'll talk about, some of that culturally responsive practice. I have a cousin who passed away a few years ago who was diagnosed with, which was the term at the time, the diagnosis at the time, severe to profound mental retardation. He was born in a place that had very few resources. My family came to the United States to help him find services, and they were subsequently taken advantage of by folks who said, "Hey, I want to help," but didn't take the time to really understand my family's culture, nor did they take the time to explain things fully to my family, for whom English was not their primary language. So all of those pieces together really, I think, have energized me and driven me to be part of a community that when we think about applied behavior analysis and education, we are really thinking about how we can be universally supportive. What are those ways that we can create an environment to be as successful as possible for as many people as possible? And I believe strongly that includes community-informed work. So work that is established and is conducted, implemented, assessed with the community that we are hoping and have the honor to serve, that is responsive to someone's culture, and culture takes on many forms. And so that being said, work that leads with humility starts with trying to understand and trying to learn, and then meeting people where they are. I think that is so important. And all of those pieces have really reframed the way that I learned in school and have hopefully helped us to start to create supports that can be more universally inclusive and more proactive in their approach.
Thank you. What a beautiful way to set the tone for this conversation. And I'm really sorry to hear about your experience and your family experience. That is why it's always a great honor for me to have experts like you that have lived it, that are talking about facts and not just being speculative. Thank you. And also thank you for being vulnerable, for being able to share this, right? So let's talk ABA, applied behavior analysis. When educators hear applied behavior analysis, many think of it as compliance, rigid, you know? I mean, I can go on and on. How do you define affirming ABA, especially for students with ADHD?
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley. And before I move into that, I just want to say I appreciate you so much. And if I could, I would send some heart emojis. Thank you for your kind words to me. I know
Thank
you've
you.
had some experiences that are maybe not dissimilar. I'm very grateful for you. I
Thank you.
appreciate that question so much. And firstly, I think it's so important to state that in applied behavior analysis, it's critical for us to learn, to listen, and to grow. And, I suppose not unlike other fields, but certainly we want to focus on our history. There are practices that we have engaged in that looking back now, I would say this is problematic. And one of those things and I say to my students at SUNY Empire State University is, that term compliance, right? That can be a really, in my opinion, that could be a dangerous term. It's important for us as educators to help empower our students to be able to advocate for themselves, make their choices. And so when we talk about things like compliance, we have to really first, I think, change that tact. Like I would love to not use that term, but also like what are we trying to really accomplish there? And if what we're trying to do is to help someone listen more attentively and attend more to their environment, I think that is okay, but that needs to be described, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's so important to just, I feel, be respectful of the critiques that we have heard in behavior analysis and continue to listen, continue to learn, continue to collaborate. So I want to start by saying I appreciate everybody who has shared these concerns, and I think they're valid and really need to be, we really need to attend to those. Um, but when I think about affirming applied behavior analysis, which honestly, Dr. Stanley, like I think that all applied behavior analysis should be affirming. I hope it is. But if we're not there, that is a benchmark, that is a goal for us and maybe a continuous goalpost. But with affirming applied behavior analysis, it's important for us to consider how the environment can be modified to be as supportive as possible. There used to be the descriptor of behavior modification. I think that we really need to kind of tweak our thinking a bit there. And I think instead is how do we create conditions in someone's environment that can help them be as successful as possible, that can help them come into contact with as many kind of reinforcers as possible. How can we help them live their lives more, be increasingly independent and autonomous, be increasingly able to make their voices heard? And I think that is a really key part of what we do. So generally, I think it's always an affirming applied behavior analysis, asking questions of what's important to you and how can we help you get there. And those being some of the key drivers, if not maybe the most critical, amongst the most critical in shaping our practices. That practice should really be collaborative. So and I know we'll talk more about this, so forgive me, but for, particularly for students with ADHD, I think a lot about some of those, again, those proactive approaches that we can engage in. I'm happy to talk more about that as we get there. What are some of the tools that we can help our students use, engage, and understand, and then track progress, right? So if a student doesn't feel like they are learning or they're successful with this strategy, rather than saying, oh, I can't do it, I'm not good enough, reframe that to, okay, we have more data. This was unsuccessful as a strategy. What are some ways we can tweak that strategy so we can be more successful? Or what's something else that we can try? And reinforcing that we're always going to figure out what is not working and then subsequently what is working so we can do more of that. So, while there certainly, I think their affirming practices can applicable across individuals with all different support needs, I think that it really starts with what's important to you, how can we help you get there, and then how can we help you see if you are reaching your goals.
Excited. So let's explore executive functioning skills, right? How can ABA specifically support executive functioning skills like attention, planning, and self regulation with students with ADHD?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Stanley. I have to
Mm,
say, for everyone's listening, I'm kind of chuckling. I was telling Dr. Stanley before we
mm,
started recording that we're recording in the middle of the afternoon. Everybody said this is the
mhm,
time when my ADHD starts to be even more.
mm,
And so I was chuckling as I was answering that question because I think I could go on. So I appreciate you all and everyone who's here and who's listening and sharing this space with us. Executive functioning. So this is something like I feel strongly about because they have helped me tremendously. And I'm just going to share, if I can, a little bit more and be vulnerable. One of the impetus for me, sort of figuring out my identity with ADHD and the other neurodiverse identities I hold was that I was finding it so difficult to focus, so difficult to concentrate, challenges I found in where to start, where to go, how to end. And that can be a really lonely and hard place to be. And also, I'm going to just speak candidly and honestly, is also a space that I was afraid to share with my colleagues, right? Because I was so worried I was less than. So the realization that I do have ADHD and that there are tools and strategies that has been incredibly helpful for me. I love this conversation. But I think, some of the things that I've tried are things like, and this certainly has its roots in applied behavior analysis, setting goals, right? That is so important. So sometimes in behavior analysis, I'll say that when we talk to our students anyway, like we can be so accustomed to thinking about programming and data collection for the learners and colleagues that we're honored to support, honored to work with and serve. Goals are incredibly
mm,
important for us to set. Some of those things have included, and you probably have talked about this on your podcast before, SMART goals, setting goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, goals that are time-based can be so helpful for me in being able to accomplish my tasks. It's really important to consider that these goals can be dynamic. On the days when it is harder for me to focus, harder for me to get started, I will make those goals smaller and therefore more achievable. So it is not infrequent that I might have a day or a morning or an hour where I will say, okay, I am going to do this one task and then I'm going to take a break. In behavior analysis, we call that the pre-MAC principle, doing something that may be not as preferred to start, as you know very well, Dr. Stanley, and then following up with the reinforcer, sort of that if-then contingency. That has been so helpful for me. What I found that as I'm moving along, if I'm, able to do those small things and have that reinforcer, what subsequently begins to occur is that I'm building behavioral momentum. So I'm able to continue to accomplish, I'm able to continue to, to engage in that work. And then over time, or maybe the next day, I can make those goals a bit bigger, but they are manageable and achievable. Something else that's been incredibly helpful for me are things like the Pomodoro method, right? While historically it was coined as 25 minutes on and 5 minutes of a break, I think doing what works for you is really critical. For me, it's more like deep, intensive work for an hour and then standing up, stretching, taking a break, giving your brain some time to reset. Thinking about those other tools, I think that have been so helpful, and I would just recommend to folks things like meditation has been actually really helpful for me. gratitude practicing, co-working. So the space that you and I are sharing right now has been so helpful for me to have a colleague there who is also working, someone present, even if it's remote, if in person or remote, can help really drive it forward. And I think to just round it all up, it's being able to collect data on how I'm doing with these things, checking off a to-do list. I take data on my moods, I take data on my behaviors, and that's how I started to identify some precursor behaviors when I might need a little bit more grace with myself. And that can really help me to see what is working and what's not working, and then that can change under different contingencies or different conditions. And then I would just say, like, having a lot of grace with ourselves because it's repetition, practice, always evolving, always continuous. If I have a few days off, I lose my routine. It takes me a couple days to get back to it, but that's okay. Rather than beating ourselves up, let's embrace this part of ourself, which is a strength, and know that we'll rise up. And the next hour is another hour, the next day is another day. If you have a day when it's all you can do to take a shower or make your bed, I appreciate you. You've done an amazing job. Give yourself a lot of credit and grace because those days can be so difficult and hard. And then there's another day, there's the next one, and you can do it. I think it's always having that mindset.
Thank you so much. What is the definition of normal? What is normal? I've always asked that question. I can't find people who can actually define that word normal. So your normal is your normal. What are the
Right.
goals? How do you achieve them? What do you have at your disposal to get those things done? As long as you
Yeah.
can get them done in a timely manner based on the tools that you have or the challenges that are in front of you, it's done. You cannot beat yourself down except you start comparing yourself with some other person. And no two people are the same. Even with ADHD, autism, you meet one, you just met one, right?
Hmm.
So I like that description of trying to put that executive functioning into perspective. Now let's move into universal design and inclusion. What does it look like to use ABA strategies, right? You've mentioned so many, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I should be getting more behavior analysts into this platform, right? How do you use ABA strategies within a universal design framework rather than as a pull out or reactive support?
Yeah, I love that question so much and agree with you. Can I just agree with you fully on what is normal? And I tend to, I try to use myself as a baseline, knowing my own body, knowing my own mind, and that is my normal. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And your normal is beautiful, and everyone's normal is wonderful. I appreciate you so much for saying that and
Thank
agree.
you.
Agree totally. So, universal design inclusion, as we've been talking about, I just feel strongly about the importance of universal design. For those who have a background in multi-tiered systems of support frameworks, you can also think of it as like that tier one. For those who haven't had some of that background, I'll just share, really briefly that universal design is this idea, this concept that was pioneered by an architect, Ron Mace, in the 1970s. Ron Mace was a wheelchair user. And so Ron Mace was noticing that he wasn't able to access some of the same buildings or environments that colleagues who were not in a wheelchair were able to access. So a really sort of tangible example of universal design that I like to think about are curb cuts that we see more commonly in, not everywhere, not around the world, but we're starting to see more commonly in certain places in the United States and certain places around the world. That makes it easier for someone who might not be able to walk, to get up onto the sidewalk. And what's so great about that is that someone who is who's not in a wheelchair, they can use the curb cut. Someone who is in a wheelchair can use the curb cut. Someone who's pushing a stroller can use the curb cut, or pushing a cart can use it. So it is a universal adaptation environmentally that is as supportive for as many people as possible. And that, I think, is the key part of universal design and what lends itself to inclusion. So something that we are working on doing at SUNY Empire State University is, again, acknowledging and embracing that this is a continuous goal, and that, again, that ever moving kind of goalpost. But we are working on the university being as an autistic and neurodiverse supportive environment. And so doing that by then having the students take training, let's say, to adapt to societal expectations, or what has been, to your earlier point, Dr. Stanley, the norm, right? That generally how we have expected students in higher education to behave. Instead, let's educate the university community on neurodiversity, on executive functioning supports, on ways that we can build coursework and develop our departments so that they are as inclusive and as supportive for as many people as possible. And in that higher ed setting, just a couple of examples of that have been, creating templates that every department can use, and every student or prospective student or alumni or anyone can use, that really clearly allows them to state, what their questions are. Flowcharts, task analyses, so for those who aren't as familiar with that term, it's sort of that step by step of a process or a procedure, because things like filling out a financial aid application can be really difficult. And I remember that personally can be really challenging. So if we have it broken down step by step with clear directions, can benefit all of us, right? Having different ways of accessing information. And then, circling back to what we talked about earlier, that is certainly those environmental modifications and environmental proactive supports. And then we collect data to see if things are working. If they are not working, how can we iterate, right? So let's make some decisions on ways we can intervene or change our conditions, evaluate and see if what we are doing is effective, if what we are seeing is working. And some of the ways that we do that in that university setting are looking for what we would sort of see, what we would maybe describe in a business sense, right, or even behavioral economics as KPIs, or key performance indicators. What are some of those benchmarks that we might be looking for? Some of those things might be the number of students who identify as autistic or neurodiverse who are graduating, who are staying in the classes and graduating, the number of students who are becoming part of our programs, the number of employees taking the training on neurodiversity, executive functioning supports, the number of courses that are structured in a way that is friendly to someone who is ADHD or another neurodiverse identity. And so that, we think, is a really powerful way. So behavior analysis to me is really thinking about measuring our progress. And again, if progress is not where we want it to be, how do we adapt and change? How do we iterate? We've got those proactive environmental supports, which to me is behavior analytic in nature. There's that universal design. It's that tier one idea that if you adapt the environment to be as supportive for as many people as possible, fewer need additional supports, fewer need to disclose, which we know can be prohibitive. We talked about my challenges in getting a diagnosis, so that's really powerful. And then the more people that are subsequently served. And that's in a higher education setting. And there's so many ways. I know we'll talk in a moment about a different kind of classroom environment, but that's what we're seeing right now at SUNY Empire.
Thank you very much. At times I say things and I wonder if I heard it somewhere, if I'm the one or the only one that has been saying it. I don't see disabilities. There's nobody that is disabled. We all have our own different abilities, but the environment is the one that creates disability. If you people sit down and decide this is how our chairs are going to look without taking everybody into consideration.
Yeah.
So any person who finds that seat uncomfortable or cannot use it automatically becomes a problem. It's the environment that creates these disabilities. That's what I say. Stand by that. Everybody can function if we take their unique gifts into consideration. You just described it with the cup. Everybody benefits. Thank you so much. I just love this conversation and your insightful expertise. Now, let's move on. I'm so excited about this question. Culturally responsive practices. In urban school settings, how can educators ensure ABA informed strategies that are culturally responsive and not rooted in this linear deficit thinking mindset.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley. As you were describing, I was really thinking about the social model of disability, creating environments that are as helpful for as many people as possible. I hope that one day we'll get to a place where everybody is thinking the way you're thinking, and it's just looking at an environment, and instead of here's the environment, here are the changes we need to make. How do we create this setting? How do we create this space, physical or virtual, these materials that are going to be as supportive for as many people as possible? I love that. And I very, very much
Thank
hope
you.
that people will hear that message and that they'll really take that away. You'll have that. I think you'll have that ripple effect.
Thank you.
Let me go back and just say, for those who aren't as familiar with the social model of disability, because we were talking a little bit about it, and your audience certainly might be, but the social model of disability is this concept that, again, the environment can change to be as supportive for as many people as possible. To what you were talking about before, Dr. Stanley, when you have a deficit model, it's in very general terms this idea that we as an individual need to change or adapt to meet some sort of norm, some sort of societal expectation, or what's been quote unquote typical, right? Like, again, that quote unquote normal. And that can be really problematic at times, especially when we're not thinking about the social model of disability, which is how does the environment change to be as supportive for as many people as possible? Thinking about what you have just stated, the neurodiversity movement, for example, is, certainly one is a social justice movement, and it includes or it considers that maybe rather than there being one typical way of thinking, one normal, like, not to overuse that word, but again, like one normal, that maybe the majority of us just think in our own ways. We process the environment differently. We think about things in the way that is normal for us. And so, how do we embrace all of that together? I think that's really key. And culturally responsive practice, I think it's, I don't want to say must because I have to, I want to stay away from like we have to things, but to me, it includes thinking about the way that somebody identifies, the way that somebody interacts in the world. Culture is very broad and has quite a few facets. All of those are things that we want to respect. There's a familial culture. You have cultures within different systems, cultures within the school. When we think about those cultures, we want to really meet our students and our colleagues where they are. We want to listen, learn, really, I think, engage in humble behavior, which is not presuming to have competence, instead asking questions and working collaboratively, because that will empower, I think, the students that we work with, our colleagues with whom we work. And so, bringing us all back to that social model of disability, I think culturally responsive and affirming practices respect the cultures that one brings, knowing that we're going to learn and ask questions, and that helps us to modify that environment to be as supportive for as many people as we can.
Thank you so much. Can you share one or two practical classroom-friendly ABA strategies that support ADHD learners, without singling out students?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a fabulous question. I'll start with sharing some strategies that you might see more commonly in the K through 6 classroom, and things that you might see a little bit more commonly for learners who are a little bit older, even in, higher education. I think some of the things we see in classroom settings, and this is something your listeners know, they do, which is super exciting. But one, that is helpful for a student with ADHD, but also for all of us, is to set those expectations clearly and to do that in collaboration with our students. I was a classroom teacher for many years. I taught preschool, early intervention,
Wow.
kindergarten. And so, yeah. So I was able to, and I taught actually through behavior analysis. So it was one of my favorite times. And so some of the
Nice.
things, some of the things we used to do is come up with classroom rules together, right? It's a collaborative, community-informed approach that helps gain buy-in. It's great for all students, including students with ADHD. And also, something to one person can seem very clear and they might understand it. But what I think that we have to be careful of is presuming that someone understands exactly what we mean when we say a certain phrase, right? Idioms are very cultural. I personally will take things really literally. I'm not as great at understanding sarcasm and things of that nature. So, without making someone feel bad, we as a classroom will go through examples and non examples of what these expectations are until we feel like we all have an understanding of it. Other things that you might see in that classroom is something that I did as a teacher, and my students just love this, which was really cool, is we would have something called a hero game or a hero contingency. And you could do this in different ways. Like the class as a whole could be the hero, right? If everybody, got their pencils out. This is back when paper and pen, right? Paper and pencil, but everyone got their pencils out, their notebooks, everyone was ready. By the time the timer went off, the hero moved up the board. When the hero moves up the board to a certain, whatever the criteria are, then we all get to take a break, right? We all can celebrate. And they're also, this is interesting because this, on surface, I think it can sound like it's singling out, but my students really love this. We could also have a student be the hero. Someone might say, Miss Noor, I want to be the hero today. And I would work with them and say, okay, what do you want to accomplish today? And they would say, I want to do this, this, and this. And I'd say, okay, perfect. So we'd check in and be like, how'd you do here? How'd you do here? And they're like, I did it. This is fabulous. And then we would all celebrate, right? So it's like knowing your students and knowing what's going to be successful for them, and you can adapt and modify that. Also, and I'll go to higher education too, peer programming and working with peers and peer mentorship. Research has really strongly supported that one, peer mentoring can be so beneficial for the mentor and the mentee. It can be so beneficial for folks of varying backgrounds and identities, including those who might identify as neurodiverse, those who might identify as BIPOC or in the Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. It can be so helpful in addressing some of those challenges that someone who might be from a historically underrepresented background could encounter. And so what's also really cool is that it's very fun to engage in peer tutoring and peer mentorship. And so I've worked with students where each took a turn being the mentor and the mentee. And so, both students are learning at the same time, keeping track of each other's progress. It can be a really fun game, and you can help all the students without anyone being singled out, without Noor always being the mentee and Dr. Stanley always being the mentor. We take turns and it's equal, which is super fun. One of my favorite stories, one of the favorite things I did as a student is I had two students in middle school who loved professional wrestling. So the World Wrestling Federation. We came together to create a game board. We talked about those hero contingencies, and this is like an example of something called the token economy system. Everybody, which is, when you progress and, whatever those criteria are, able to move up. So the students were so excited, and they each got to choose a wrestler. I created this board that had a big wrestling ring. They were able to move up together as they were learning, and when they both got to the ring, they could use the action figures and wrestle. And so it was a way that they both learned, that they both had a really good time. I loved it, and it can make like that learning so super fun. Okay, and then super briefly, I'll share that some things that we do, like in higher grades and university, if we have a big assignment, it can be in, ADHD, depression, anxiety, they're often comorbidly diagnosed. They often comorbidly exist, as you know very well. And so something that, our research has suggested is that having one major assignment, I'm going to be a little facetious, but you have one assignment due and it's worth everything, can really be super challenging, can lead to a lot of anxiety. And a part of executive functioning can be difficulties with time management, not knowing where to start. Breaking down those assignments into subparts, right? Being able to give feedback on each of those aspects, giving deadlines in the interim can help set a student up for success so that by the time they're getting to the final assignment, they've had feedback, they've had the ability to practice, and we're able to work with them, which hopefully will lessen the anxiety and also breaks things into manageable parts. And then finally, strength-based choices, right? Like you talked a lot, I feel like you've talked a lot about this, and I've shared some of these pieces. Where can we embed choice in terms of assignments? So my students here, and I see this in higher grades as well, even lower grades, my students can do a webinar, they can do a podcast, they can do a paper, they can do a presentation. The function of it is to maybe assess the knowledge gained or their certain skills, but it doesn't have to look like a 20-page paper. It can take on different forms. And so embracing that and supporting our students to make those strength-based choices.
It's interesting. That's great. Thank you so much putting those things in perspective. That takes us to the next question, which is around Misconceptions. Yesterday, I was scrolling through my Instagram account, and I'm not going to mention names, but I saw somebody that claimed to be a research fellow making a presentation to a group of people. I couldn't really see the people, but he was talking about ADHD and SPED. And he was using terms that really bothered and troubled me. Oh, you have a voice in SPED. Great. I gave him a check mark. I said, yes, parents, everybody should have a voice. The law says that it's there. Then he goes, you don't have to accept your kid to be spared. Don't make them do that to you. Then he jumped to the second thing. He gave an example with ADHD. And I was like, I wish I could interrupt that process, but it's recorded. I couldn't do anything. He said, don't allow any person to place your kids in medication because that's how they take kids away from us. They will say it's medical neglect and they're going to take your child. So don't ever agree to it. Don't even allow them to diagnose your child with ADHD. And I was like, oh my goodness, a lot of misconceptions. Awareness is key. Yes, the system is designed by those who are not knowledgeable or aware of some of these challenges in a way that has been totally unfair. But making statements like that, special ed is a service, it's not a place. It's a service, and people fought to make sure people can benefit from those services if they need it. People speculate and diagnose those who have no place diagnosing people with ADHD. They do that based on their own experience or speculation. Totally wrong. We need professionals to do the diagnosis process. But if they find out that medication should be part of the process, I am one who advocates seriously for behavioral modification and strategies, right? But there are certain situations that truly need it, and research has shown if we get the right dosage and combine it with behavioral strategies, I mean, the benefit is enormous. There's research to show that. To outright dump such open ended, he might be upset, he might be an advocate, but to throw the baby away with the bathwater creates a lot of disservice to marginalized groups, those who don't have opportunities to those services, right? This question is very important to me, and I think most of my listeners. That's why I'm taking all this minute to really dive into this.
Mhm.
Misconceptions. What's the most common misconception about ABA that you wish educators and families would unlearn?
Thanks, Dr. Stanley. I appreciate you sharing so much. And I'll start by saying that to this story that you have graciously shared with us, I think it can be really dangerous to give misinformation. It is so important to empower caregivers, individuals, everybody in the community to learn and to understand, what the research, the science says, and, certainly always growing, always moving forward. It's hugely important that we're helping folks to make informed decisions,
Decision.
hmm rather than fearing. I think that's so important. So thank you for sharing. And I agree, this question goes right alongside with it. Dr. Stanley, I'll be honest, and I was thinking about this question before we met and really deeply. I think I will answer it to the best of my ability. I just wanted to start by saying that, you know, it's so interesting. Like rather than thinking about misconceptions, this question really had me thinking about or considering how sincerely I would love for there to be a meeting of the minds a safe space where everybody has a voice at the table and that everyone's coming with the understanding that we all care and want to make the world better, make the environment better. We want to help rather than harm. We want to, leading with that principle of do no harm and benefiting others. And I feel like when we start there, we can come together to understand what are some of the challenges that folks have experienced with ABA. What are some of the ways that we can address and make that better and or explain, so that we can come as one to say this is how we move forward. I was proud that we did this past year or last year rather at a conference where, Dr. Stanley, I know you were, is that we had a panel where we had folks from all backgrounds and identities, those who identify as autistic, caregivers of loved ones with more significant support needs, with less support needs, everyone coming together to just say, like, where do we start? What is affirming applied behavior analysis? If that's okay, to sort of state that that was something that got my brain going there. I think I would say, to answer specifically to a misconception, I hope that we can help our communities know that there are many, many, many of us who care so deeply, and we want to do what's in the best interest. We want to listen and we want to learn. I believe behavior analysis is that, again, that affirming practices, which is, a core tenet of what we do, is asking folks, like, what do you want? How do we help you to get there? And then how can we help you see if this is working for you? And that, I think, is really a core part of behavior analysis. And it should be. If it hasn't been, I'm so sorry, but it is a way that we definitely want to move forward. And there is, as you know very well, Dr. Stanley, an article that I always think about. It was written back in the 70s by Montrose Wolf, and it was social validity, or how ABA is finding its heart. Social validity means asking what's working, getting feedback, and listening to the community. That should always be a core tenet of what we do. And I hope that it will be moving forward.
Thank you. People hear about ABA, they hear about BCBAs, they hear about
Mhm.
ROB, and most people are wondering what it takes to either become a practitioner or to access practitioners to get that support. How would you advise? Who should educators or families look for when seeking a qualified, ethical ABA practitioner? And what are appropriate ways to find or contact providers?
No,
Okay, good.
that's great. Thank you, Dr. Stanley.
Yeah.
I appreciate that question. My strong recommendation is to look for, and I know that there are many communities that are under-resourced, but you know please know that you deserve, as an individual, as a family, as a professional, someone who listens to you, someone who listens to those we're supporting, who leads by asking questions, listening, learning, who is saying to you, again, at the risk of sounding repetitive, what's important to you, what's important to your loved one, and asking that question to the individual that we're so honored and fortunate to work with, to collaborate with. How can we empower? How can we provide choices? How can we make your worlds better in a way that is important to you? And to do that in a really collaborative way, like every step of the way, the practitioner, should be in there with you, guiding you, supporting you, listening, making changes as appropriate, sharing data with you. It's a team. You should know that you are the most integral part of the team. You, as the person that we're supporting, you, as the family, you, as the professional, look for that, advocate for that. That's the cultural shift. If we haven't been there, thinking about our previous questions, some of the challenges and the criticisms, that is where we are hoping to move to, and that is where we're going to go. If we have done that in the past and moved away from it, that is something we need to focus on. So That is what I would recommend. And to find a practitioner, that's a fabulous question. Just in a practical sense, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or the BACB, has a website, bacb.com, and you can go into the website. You can actually search for providers in your state. Dr. Stanley and I are in New York State, and in New York State, I think that the state has our office professions has the number of behavior analysts per county, but not necessarily a list. So I think that BACB website is going to be really helpful. But also, now I do want to just give a plug for the New York State Association for Behavior Analysis. Your state, your local chapters are wonderful resources to connect you and to be able to, give answers to not only practitioners, but also individuals, families, caregivers. And if you're in New York State and you're hearing this, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to work with you. So please don't hesitate to contact me. Doing that would just make it better. I would say your state chapters like NYSABA would be a really lovely place to connect with practitioners.
Thank you so much. I know you're very busy, and I'm so grateful you've given us all this time. So, to wrap up, please could you share your work with listeners? And so, how can they reach you? You know, I think most people want to know that. If you can share that with us, that would be appreciated.
Oh, I would be absolutely honored. Some of the main work that I'm doing right now
Mhm.
is to help Empire State University be an autistic supportive institution. We have a master's program there that we started at the same time as the center, as CARES. It's predicated on affirming culturally responsive ABA. And the other kind of big project that I'm a part of is I'm the director of Anderson Center International. We support scholars from under-resourced areas around the world to come to a center in New York to have a fully paid training in autism and evidence-based practices. And then we support when they go back home in terms of disseminating and being able to connect with their communities to build capacity and to build awareness, acceptance, and inclusion. I'd be honored to talk with anybody about those things or anything else that's on your mind. I think the best way to reach me is via email, and it's my first Noor.Syed at SUNYEmpire.edu. So first dot last name at SUNYEmpire.edu, and that's NOOR.SYED at SUNYEmpire.edu.
Dr. Syed, thank you for grounding this conversation in both science and humanity, which is a difficult concept for most people to do. Your emphasis on affirming practice, executive functioning, and culturally responsive systems challenges us to think differently about how we support neurodiverse students, especially in urban educational settings, right? Thank you for being here with us. We are so appreciative for you not just being vulnerable, but sharing your expertise and experience means a lot to us.
Thank you so much. And not sure when this is coming up, but as we're recording, it's early January. So Happy New Year, everybody. So grateful to all of you for spending time with Dr. Stanley and I. Dr. Stanley, thank you from the bottom of my heart for asking me to be here. Truly.
For our listeners, we hope today's conversation helped unstitch some of the myths around ADHD and ABA, while offering practical guidance for building classrooms and systems that are inclusive by design, not by exception. Thank you for joining us today on Unstitching ADHD Urban Ed Talks. Until next time, let's keep leading with equity, evidence, and empathy. And remember, the sun is behind the clouds. It will always shine, especially for those who are patient and persistent. So until next time, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.